Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on Christ, Culture, and Coffee. And we are back this week continuing in kind of that progressive church series that we've been doing right now. And we are super excited about our special guest with us today.
Yeah, today we have Marcia Montenegro with us. Marcia is just kind of from afar mentored me somewhat through reading her books, being on her website, listening to other podcasts that she's been on. And she's been a really helpful source for me to sort through aspects of the New Age that are creeping into not only society, but also into the church. Marcia was actually in the New Age for many years. She was an astrologer. She came to faith in Jesus, and now she has a ministry to people who are engaged in the New Age and the occult. And you should check out all of her stuff at Christian Answers for the New Age. She just does awesome work, very helpful, very thorough. She also has a master's from Southern Evangelical Seminary, so she is our go-to person when it comes to cults and the occult and the New Age. So, Marcia, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, hi. Thank you for having me, Robbie and Tyler. And I'm always ready to talk about these topics, so I appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, of course. Well, with that, we would like to know from you personally. We always ask our guests on the show.
First question. Big deal.
First question. It's very important to start off with this, on this topic. Do you like coffee? And if so, what type of coffee do you enjoy, and what do you like to drink on a regular basis?
I love coffee. I drink it every morning.
Amen.
Nice.
Without fail. I have to have my 1 cup. I don't drink it all day, but I have to have, sometimes I have 2 cups. And I go through phases with it of different types of coffee I like. Like I was really into just brewing my coffee, and I was doing that. And then I decided I just wanted to do something easier, so I switched to instant, but it's Cafe Bustelo, which is probably the best instant coffee out there.
I've never had that. Okay.
Oh my goodness. Yes, you need to it's actually expensive if you look for it like on Amazon. And so I bought a container of 12 boxes, and each one has 6 little what do you want to say, servings?
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. 6 cups, but I've had to buy 12, and that was the most economical package I saw. But then I also got a jar of it when I wasn't sure how to get it. I managed to get a jar of it on Amazon Fresh.
Okay.
So because I've been getting my groceries delivered, so I did get that, and it was very reasonable. I have been drinking that plus. And a lot of coffee people probably going to really look down on this. Maxwell House International Coffees, they have all these flavors. I have been trying Cafe Orange.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I thought Cafe Orange, I don't know if I'm going to like it, but I decided to try it. I do like orange flavors, and it's delicious.
Okay. Man, you're giving us new tips. I've never tried any of that.
Yeah,
I need to.
It's kind of like having coffee with the orange juice at the same time.
Oh, interesting.
Wow. Okay. I can picture that, yeah.
So I'm doing that and the Cafe Bustelo right now, but I have some brewed coffee, and that changes. It alters. I like kind of a stronger, I don't like real strong, but I like a robust, smooth.
Yeah. Man, that's great.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah,
I love the title of your show.
Oh,
Christ,
thank you.
Culture, Coffee. Yeah, it's just great.
Yeah,
so I wonder if you ever kicked off anybody if they said, no, I don't like coffee, I drink tea.
There's been one.
We had one guy. We did. We had one guy.
One guy enough to say he didn't drink coffee.
Yeah, and then he backpedaled and he said, but I love the smell of it.
Yeah,
and so we said, okay, that's close enough. That's fine.
Okay. That saved him.
That saved him, yep. Well, hey, we are so thankful to have you
Yes.
here. This is going to just be an awesome interview. So, Marcia, you wrote this book. You co-authored this book called Richard Rohr and the Enneagram Secret. Now, the Enneagram has kind of taken the evangelical church by storm in the past, 5 to 10 years. And a lot of places are incorporating it into what they do as a church. I've seen devotionals being written for your certain Enneagram types. Can you explain to our audience, because some of them might be unfamiliar with what is the Enneagram being marketed as, and why are Christians thinking that, hey, this is a good thing to incorporate into our spiritual life?
Yes, and it is quite a story. I have been tracking this for several years, even before it got into the church. My first article on it was in 2011. And well, actually, then it was in the progressive church.
Okay.
And it was being taught or introduced at some of their conferences. And that's how I noticed it being anywhere near some kind of church, aside from the Jesuits way back. Some Jesuits took it into the Catholic Church, but it was never endorsed by the Catholic Church.
Okay.
And I don't think it ever went that far there. It was just like certain people were doing it. But anyway, back to answering the question you asked me. Some people, might not even know what is an Enneagram, so I should say what it is. It's a geometric figure, and it has 9 points. So it's very angular looking, and you can count, the points 1 through 9.
Okay.
And each of those points in the Enneagram is called a type or a number. So people may use type or number. They may say, well, I'm number 4 on the Enneagram, or I'm type 4 on the Enneagram. And what it is supposed to represent is your type, the type that you are the closest to in terms of the description that is given for each type. It's supposed to represent now here's where it gets complicated right away.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Originally, the way the Enneagram was used with types was that the type was a false self. The type is a false construct that you have identified with because of your experiences, because of your fears, because of weaknesses that you have fallen into in your character, because of the way you've been conditioned. All of these things have caused you to be this certain type, but that's not really who you are. So the original idea of it really, and the way Richard Rohr teaches it, and I'll talk about him more, later, is that this type is hiding the true self. And the true self is the self, this essence. The word essence is often used, especially in the New Age. The essence is the true self that has never been separated from God, and is this goodness. It's a goodness in you. Some people, and then it can be termed differently, might say it's God, that of God in you.
Okay.
In the New Age, they're very, they just say that's your, your divine self, who you really are.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit Hinduistic or Buddhist. Like you gotta demean, not demean, but reduce your personality and realize your oneness with the one. It sounds kind of similar to that.
Yeah, it is very much, yes, it is very much like Hinduism, which says that we all have the Atman. The Atman is like the inner self, the true self that is from God and with God, with the Hindu concept of God, which is different from the biblical God.
Sure.
But yeah, it is very similar. And of course, that idea is in the New Age too, because the New Age draws from Eastern religions, but it's also very Gnostic, because in Gnostic views, you have, in the early Gnostics, we were all spirits with God, and we took on bodies and were trapped in these bodies, and we identify with these bodies, and we think that's who we are. And what we need to realize is that we're really these spirits from God, so that we can go back to God. So it's very similar.
Yeah.
There's a similar idea there where you have a false self and a true self. Huh. And so the Enneagram, really, that is the idea, the way it originally was taught. And of course, it was not taught originally by a Christian. And the people who originally taught it had these kind of New Age Gnostic occult views. And Richard Rohr, who learned it when some Jesuits were learning it, although he's not a Jesuit, but he happened to be learning it at the same place where other Jesuits were learning it. in Chicago, as I understand it. He has taken it and kind of put his own spin on it. He wrote a book with Andrews Ebert that came out around 1990, 1991, 1992. There was a few editions of it there, called The Enneagram, A Christian Perspective.
Okay.
And so that gives the idea that it's a Christian tool, or it can be a Christian tool. And I think that's the first time that the word Christian was associated with it.
Okay.
And so a lot of people who would not know about Richard Rohr or what he believes would assume this could be a Christian tool. And so the progressives who already liked Richard Rohr, because he's very progressive, I guess they got interested in the Enneagram, or maybe he taught it to them. I don't really know, but I know they started presenting it at their conferences. Now, the thing is, Richard Rohr does not have the biblical view of ourself. And what God tells us is that, okay, we're all created by God. We're all individuals. We're all unique. Okay, everybody is unique and created in the image of God.
Yes.
That means that we have certain characteristics, moral characteristics, that reflect the absolute morality of God's character. And so how we can understand justice, or how we can understand being good, or how we can understand being merciful is going to be based on God's character. But we can look to God and we can understand that and strive for it as Christians, because God made us in his image. So we have that kind of built-in understanding of those qualities. Of course, we fall way short of it.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Yeah.
That's where sin
But
comes in.
we're
Yeah.
aware, and we're aware of that standard, especially, when you become a Christian, you realize the standard. So it's not like we have some kind of true self hidden in us that we have to uncover. We have self that is fallen.
Yes.
And corrupt by sin. So we're all born sinners. We're all born separated from God. And in order to be reconciled to God, we have to trust in Christ. And that is one of the reasons he came and died on the cross and paid the penalty for sins. And through faith in Christ, we're reconciled with God and we're forgiven. All right. At that point, the Bible tells us we're a new creature, a new creation in Christ. I think it's 2 Corinthians 5:17.
Yep.
And that new creation is regenerated, a regenerated self by the Holy Spirit. It's not like we regenerate ourselves.
No.
It's like, okay,
yeah.
now I'm in Christ, I'm going to regenerate myself and become a new person. It's supernatural. It's the supernatural work of the Holy Spirit.
Yep.
And that, and in that sense, we are a new creation, but it's not like we're a new self, but it's not true self, false self.
Right.
So this is where it gets the waters have really been muddied here.
So when it comes to, I had a question about that. So
Yeah.
you're saying originally the Enneagram was about, hey, you're this type, and you need to realize that all that stuff isn't who you really are.
Yeah.
Well, the way I see people using it is it's more like, no, this is my personality test, and I do
Yes.
these things just because that's who I am.
Yes, and that's where more confusion comes in.
Okay.
It's just, it is just one big mass of
Oh.
confusion.
Okay.
That's what happens when you have a deception. And what you have is you have layer after layer after layer. And that's why if someone says to me, let's say just in casual conversation or maybe on Facebook, I've heard of this Enneagram, but I don't really understand what's wrong with it. I can't just tell them in one or two sentences.
Sure.
It's like I have to try to summarize it and then give them a link to an article or something where they can go read it, because it's just wrapped. It's like a falsehood wrapped in another falsehood wrapped in another falsehood. Like those Russian dolls, those nesting dolls.
Okay.
And you keep opening the doll and there's another one, and you open it and there's another one. That's kind of like what the Enneagram is, except all those dolls are like all the falsehoods. And it's just such a mess. So here we go. So that's why I'm very careful to say the original Enneagram teaching is about this true self, false self.
Okay.
And Richard Rohr put his own spin to it, which is, just briefly, one of the things Richard Rohr teaches is that we have a self that was never separated from God, because he's a perennialist. So see, then now I have to bring in perennialism.
Yeah.
Please
Because-
explain that. Yeah.
So the perennial philosophy or perennial wisdom is the idea that all religions share the same core truth. This is not the same thing as saying there is truth in all religions. Now, whether that's true or not, it's not quite the same as that. This is more extreme. This is that they all come from and share a core truth, a core divine reality, which is how sometimes some of them put it. And so even though they look different, so you have Hinduism over here, you have Buddhism here, you have Islam, Christianity, it's like, well, wow, they look so different, and they do different prayers, and they even talk about God differently. The perennialist says, well, that's okay, it just kind of evolved that way, but it all goes back to the same source. So they're all really part of the same truth. They are just understanding it and acting it out differently.
Wow.
And so for the perennialist, everybody in some way is connected to this truth and is part of God. God really in perennialism, as far as I can understand it, and I want to say, that I don't consider myself an expert on it. So just so people understand that I'm not trying to be an expert, but from the way I understand it, is that everybody is connected to God, and this God is kind of impersonal because they'll call God, the way they talk about God is very impersonal, like God is living wisdom. Okay, I think the Bible even calls God, wisdom, but God is also personal. It's made very clear in the Bible, God is personal.
That's right.
But in the perennial view, he's living wisdom, he's divine reality, he's present in creation. That's another thing. So creation is not just material. Creation is imbued with the presence of God.
Oh, okay. That's very Hinduistic again, right? Kind of that
idea. It is.
Yeah.
And New Age.
Yeah.
And so you have this reality that is just kind of, the reality is God in a way, because God, it's not pantheism though. It's not God is all is God. It's panentheism. God is in all is in God, and there is a difference. So God is in creation, and since we're all part of creation, we're all part of God too, and we're in God. And so Richard Rohr teaches this because he's very open about being not only a perennialist, but being a panentheist. I mean, he uses the word freely on his blog at cac.org. Anybody who wants to know what he believes, it's very easy to find out what he believes.
Wow, yeah. So we're not speaking out of turn. We're not trying to fling mud.
No,
like, this is what he believes.
I'm not misunderstanding Richard Rohr. He's very open about this. So because of that, he says we all have divine DNA. And so that's where his idea, although it's slightly different, is compatible with these other ideas where I've been talking about the true self being part of God and in God and never separated. Richard Rohr, his ideas overlap with and are very similar to that.
I see. So when it comes to like the Christian Enneagram, when he writes a book like this, he could just as easily call it the Islamic or the Hindu, because it's not a Christian thing. He thinks it applies to everybody in every part of the world, in every religion.
Right. Well, he calls it Christian because in his view, he has this thing about the Eastern Orthodox, and he thinks that the Eastern Orthodox, who do tend to be more mystical than Western churches, they kind of understand all this. He thinks they're closer to the truth. So he thinks Eastern Orthodox Christianity has at least the seeds of this truth. So in that sense, he thinks it's okay to use the word Christian. And the way he interprets the Bible, he interprets every time Paul writes in Christ, and he says that quite often. And in fact, I think Richard Rohr gave the number of times Paul wrote that. I can't remember what he said, but it's something like 68 times or something, I think. He takes it literally. So when Paul writes in Christ, are you in Christ? Literally, we're in Christ because the first incarnation of Christ was creation, according to Richard Rohr.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, that's an
so
interesting
everybody's
interpretation.
in Christ.
Wow.
Yeah, everybody's in Christ already. So we don't need salvation. See, so Jesus didn't die for sins. So that's kind of the path. When you go down Roar's path,
So-
that's where you go.
Yeah, so that's the true self in
That's
itself,
the,
is that
that
you
is
are.
the true Enneagram.
So that's
Yeah.
what you're trying. What he believes you're trying to get to through the Enneagram
Yes.
is the true self as being one with God, essentially.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, and you can understand, if you can understand that you've never been separated and you're part of this creation that Christ is in, you're already connected and you're already part of it. And he thinks this is the great revelation. And but you can't just hear him say this or read it and then say, "Oh, yeah, I understand. I believe it." You have to come to it through certain methods, and these are contemplative methods.
Okay.
And he says contemplation is a form of unlearning. So you need to unlearn these false concepts that you have, like I need to be saved, or I need to be forgiven, or, Jesus came to die for sins. Those are all these false concepts that are holding you back from this understanding, and unlearn through contemplation. And that's why he's so big on contemplation. I mean, his center that he started, I think in 1986, is called the Center for Action and Contemplation.
Wow.
And it's in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Well, and see, that just goes against what Scripture teaches about
Yeah.
how we're to love God with our mind, that we are to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. It's not about emptying our mind and unlearning. It's about learning what's true and real.
Yeah,
It's
and then
interesting.
with that too, I also see it as when it's talking about the true self, that would imply that our true self is good and perfect. Biblically,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
not true. Our true
Yeah.
self is corrupt. It's
broken,
wicked. It's
yeah.
evil. And like we're trying to get away from ourselves. That's why we need Jesus to come inside our lives to change our true self, because our true self
Right.
is corrupt.
Yeah.
So it's very
Right.
counter gospel with that foundation.
It is. It is. And yet, this is what's in the church. Now, what's happened is that people have taken it and they've tried to make it into a Christian tool. So they've taken some of these concepts and true self and false self and tried to use them biblically, which you can't do because they don't fit in a Christian context. And so what happens is they either end up redefining what the Enneagram is really saying, in which case, are they really teaching the Enneagram, or are they just teaching something they made up?
Good question.
That's what
Yeah.
they're just teaching something they made up. It's like, okay, I'm just going to change this. It doesn't. And so, for example, Jeff and Beth McCord say they teach the Gospel-Centered Enneagram. And now you see the word gospel attached to Enneagram more and more, not just from them, but from other people. There's a website called Gospel Enneagram run by a pastor, or at least he was a pastor, and some other people. And he's going into the Enneagram coaching business.
Wow.
And it's called Gospel Enneagram, and he wants to train other pastors in this. I mean, this is spreading in the church.
Yeah.
It is not just like a few people in the pew here and there are doing it. It's like leaders in the church are doing it. Pastors are doing it. Pastors who teach other pastors are doing it. This is what makes it so spreading so fast and makes it such a problem. And then, of course, a lot of people assume, well, these pastors, they, especially if they've been to seminary, they've studied the Bible, they wouldn't take a tool that is blatantly anti-Christian and teach it in my church, so they're trusting that. And then all the books that have come out, we have over 30 books. I think we may be up to 35 now. Enneagram books from IVP, Varsity Press, Zondervan, Thomas Nelson, and other publishers. And they're just churning them out. I used to keep track of them, and I know I had to give up on it. I couldn't keep track any. I mean, I'm trying to, but I couldn't really keep track. It seems like every other week I hear about another book. So, and these books repeat a lot of falsehoods, which I want to go into. But to get to the core of this, for Christians who are saying, we'll use the Enneagram. So, for example, they might say, okay, you have discovered or you realize you are a type 4. So this is who you are, but you're kind of caught in this. You're not really living the good side of 4. You're not being a healthy 4.
Okay.
And so you have to work it out. There's a connection with 2 other numbers in the Enneagram. One brings out your strengths and one brings out your weaknesses. So you learn from the one that brings out your strengths. And then there's also what's called wings. So wing is a number on either side of you. So like if you're a type 7, you could be a type 7 with a wing 8 or a type 7 with a wing 6.
Okay.
Or you could just be the type 7 with no wing. And so then you're supposed to like take all that in and incorporate into who you are. And here's the thing. If you're going to use something like that, I think my first question would be, if someone presented this to me, would be, but where did this come from?
Yeah.
And why are there 9 types? Who decided there were 9 to begin with? And what is it based on? And I would assume it was based on some psychological theories of personality, right?
Yeah, like a Myers-Briggs or DISC test.
Even if the research wasn't good, you'd think, well, it was based on some kind of research or some kind of theory.
Yeah, sure.
Something from psychology. Nope. That's completely missed.
That's what I thought when I first heard of it. And then, like, I had these preconceived ideas thinking, oh, yeah, it's something that's from psychology. It has to be because it seems so organized. I'm like, there's no way someone just made this up, but...
Well, let's get into that. Like, where does this originate? Because I know a lot of people say, oh, this has been in the church for years. And if you look all the way back, even into, the Greek culture and the early patristics, it's all there. So let's get into, where did this Enneagram thing come from?
Yes, the Enneagram is 105 years old as a chart, not even with types.
Wow.
It's 105 years old. 1916.
What about the ancient Enneagram? I've heard that a lot. It's not
ancient. I know. Doesn't exist.
Wow.
And there's all these stories about this 4th century monk, Evagrius Ponticus, because what he was doing, and apparently this was sort of a trend at the time, according to, and I'm going to mention my friend, Dr. Ronald V. Huggins, who is a scholar. He's been published in Scholarly Things. He's taught at 3 seminaries.
Yeah.
His dissertation was in patristic, history, the church fathers and everything. I mean, this is his area of specialty.
Yeah.
He has looked at this. He said at that time, Evagrius Ponticus and other people at that time in the church were fascinated by the shape of numbers. So you put numbers into shapes. And they just got into it. It was like this fad. And so Evagrius Ponticus wrote about these shapes of numbers. And people have read that thinking that he's writing about like actual geometric figures that have some kind of meaning, and that he was writing about the Enneagram, which is not true. He never wrote about the Enneagram, and he didn't use that word. Nothing he wrote has anything to do with the way the Enneagram is being taught today. Okay. It's not, it's just not there. So he got into it because I think he's the one who wrote about the 7 deadly sins. And the 7 deadly sins were used in the 20th century by one of the early Enneagram pioneers, Oscar Ichazo. Okay. So I'll get to him in a second. And so I think that's why people try to make that connection.
I see.
But of course, when Evagrius Ponticus was writing about the 7 deadly sins, it had nothing to do with any kind of, personality. I mean, the concept of personality actually didn't exist then. That's a modern concept from psychology. Okay. They had temperaments from Greece. I think they had the 4 temperaments, but that's not exactly the same. That had a lot to do with your physical nature and how to treat illnesses.
Oh, okay.
So that went on into the Middle Ages. Chaucer wrote about that, the 4 temperaments, and even the church. It got into the church too. Like you're phlegmatic, or you're I can't remember the other 3.
Or melancholic.
Yeah. That goes way back. That's ancient, but it's not really personality the way we understand it today.
Yeah.
So there was no ancient line of Enneagram. The other person that sometimes they try to latch the Enneagram to is, I feel sorry for these people in history that had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
Being named as part of it,
Yeah.
Ramon Lull, who was a medieval Roman Catholic monk in Spain,
Okay.
and he loved to draw diagrams.
Hmm.
And some of the diagrams he drew were to try to illustrate the Trinity.
Okay.
And he wanted to try to convince Muslims were in Spain at that time. That's when the Muslims had not been chased out of Spain yet. There was a big culture in, I've been to Spain and I've been to southern Spain where you can go and see, like Granada. It's a huge, beautiful, the Alhambra. It's called the Alhambra. It's a Moorish, palace.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Granada, you can still see it. It's beautiful. So the Moors were there. So he was trying to basically evangelize them or prove to them the Trinity was true, because of course he knew they didn't accept that. So he was using these charts, and there's one particular chart he did that you will sometimes see in Enneagram books, and they claim that this was an Enneagram that he drew, and it's not. It's just not. Dr. Huggins has looked at that. We have quoted him in our book, and he said this is not the Enneagram. It's not what Ramon Lull was writing about. It has nothing to do with what people say it is. It was a picture of the attributes of God.
Oh, okay. It
So
seems like people are trying to justify their beliefs by finding something. It's almost like an egg hunt they're going on. Not something they derived, but we've concluded this, and now we're going to go bolster our conclusion by finding maybe some type of evidence in the past.
Yeah. Well, and this was kind of started by Richard Rohr too, because interestingly enough, in his first book with the Imbued, they said there was no Christian origins to the Enneagram.
Okay. So he said that. He said there's no Christian origins. Wow.
And we have my co-author, Don Vino, has the source for that quote.
Wow, okay.
I can't remember it, so I can't tell it to you. I mean, I'm terrible remembering things.
It's in the book. I remember you have it footnoted
in the book. It's in the book. Yep. So get the book, and my co-author, Don Vino, knows it. Yep. and he's really good at things like that. He's like, oh, yeah, that's here, So he said that. They wrote that. It has no Christian. Then they changed it.
Wow.
And they brought forth the idea of Vivagoras Panicus and Ramon Lull, and that kind of spread. And what happened was, so now you have this idea that it's ancient when it really isn't. So here's the real story. A man named George Gergief, who was a kind of an esoteric spiritual seeker, kind of like an early New Ager, kind of like I was, I was a spiritual seeker. I wanted to investigate different belief systems, and he was like that. And he traveled, and he supposedly went to different places to try to learn. He had been raised Eastern Orthodox, but he rejected that, and he was seeking other ideas. And he became a teacher. He got followers. People started following him because he would share these things that he said he had learned. And one of the things he did is that he actually is the first one who drew that 9-pointed figure, the Enneagram. And he drew it because he said this figure represents the universe. You can put the universe in this figure.
What does that
this
mean?
Figure explains. This is an esoteric. Having been a New Ager, I completely understand this.
Okay.
It's like it totally makes sense to me. I'm like, yeah, I can see that, It's this idea that you can somehow capture all the profound esoteric wisdom and laws of the universe with a diagram. It's the kind of thinking that you have when you're an esoteric Gnostic type thinker. You think that you're able to illustrate reality with a certain diagram. And this actually happened in the 1800s with Eliphas Levi, which is not his real name. He's the one who drew the Baphomet, the goat figure, and he didn't draw it as a Satanism thing, which is now associated with Satanism, but he drew it to illustrate reality. And he put like Hebrew words around it and everything. It was supposed to be like a spiritual picture of reality. So he had the same, and so actually he did it before Gergief did, but he just did it, completely different way, and it was different ideas in a way, but it was similar because they both think they're illustrating reality here.
Okay.
So what he did was, because it has 9 points on it, he said it illustrated the law of 3 and the law of 7, and there are all these little mathematical games you can play with the points. And since I'm horrible at math, I can't remember. I read about this and how he did it. It's like I read about it and like 5 minutes later I forgot it, because it's like it just doesn't stick in my brain. But
Sure.
you can look it up and look up law of 3, law of 7, and so he's like, oh, if you put this and then you go from here to here, and 9 is supposed to be a special number in some religious traditions.
Okay.
Because it's the number right before 10. So you and there's some in numerology you cast out 9s.
Oh, okay.
So I learned some numerology as a New Ager, and when you add numbers up, you cast out 9s. So if I'm adding up a name and it comes to 14, okay, if you minus 9, you get 5. You also 14, 1 and 4 is 5.
Oh, okay. I see.
If you get 17 and minus 9, you get 8, right? 1 and 7 is 8. You see how that works? It's like a little magic. It's like a little magic trick.
Okay.
Except it's true. It's mathematical.
That's real. Yeah, that's a real
Yeah,
thing.
it's
Sure.
real. But see, and that's the kind of thing he was doing with the chart. And he would put the musical scale on it.
Oh, okay.
Musical scale on it. So he was just really into this chart, and it became used also to represent. He said all of us are born asleep, and we need to awaken to who we really are. He called it the new man. So you need to go through this process, long process of becoming the new man. Of course, this was part of his esoteric teaching. And the Enneagram became used for that, to illustrate these steps and things like that. Now, he did not write about the Enneagram. So everything we know about what he said comes mainly from his students, and especially his main student, P.D. Uspensky, who was a Russian. And Uspensky wrote 4 books about Gergief's teachings, and he wrote about the Enneagram, and he taught Gergief's philosophy. And by this time, you had followers of Gergief, and then Uspensky had followers. And so now you have the followers spreading, in different countries. And there are still followers today of Gergief's teachings. There are different groups around the world. Most of them are kind of cults. They're really cults. And they supposedly teach what Gergief was teaching. So he still has followers today. Okay. Now, he and Uspensky, but at that time, the only people who knew about this Enneagram were the people following Gergief and Uspensky.
Yeah,
nobody else. Yeah, nobody else was interested, and they weren't going around, they just kept it to themselves. They both died in the late 1940s.
Okay.
And then, as far as we know, everything was kind of quiet until the 60s. And I don't know the exact year. I don't know if anyone knows the exact year. Here again, when you're dealing with New Age people, you get stories, and it's very hard to get facts. Okay. For example, Gergief claimed that he went to the secret Sufi brotherhood, and he even gave a name, and it's been debunked. There was no such.
Oh.
There's no such secret Sufi brotherhood.
It's hard to trust people when they're saying certain things that didn't happen. Yeah, that's difficult.
Yeah. And in fact, they're not even sure he even met any Sufis at all.
Wow. Okay.
So a lot of his tales could just have been made up. We don't know. Yeah. This is true for Madame Blavatsky of the Theosophical Society. There's many people like this that are kind of in that New Age esoteric area with these stories that can't be verified. So this is very typical. So here's another one. Oscar Ichazo comes along in the 60s, and there are different stories about how he came across the Enneagram. So one of them is that he was at a cafe, and there were followers of Gergief there, and he heard them talking and started talking to them and found out about the Enneagram. That's one story.
It might be. Okay. Could be.
That's one. Yeah, it might be true. I don't know. It might not be.
Yeah, right.
But somehow he did find out about it. We know that. And he took it because he started teaching at this school that he founded called Arica in Arica, Chile, although he was Bolivian.
Okay.
And he took the Enneagram. He put the 7 deadly sins around it, and then he had to add 2 more to make 9.
Oh, okay.
Since they're 9 points, so he had to add 2 more because he had to have 9.
Yeah, there's 9 points, so you got to have 9.
Yeah. but he's not talking about sins the way the Bible talks about sins. Sins, what does the Bible tell us? Sin is rebelling against God, right? It's basically rebellion. It's wanting to do our will over God's will.
Yes. Yep.
That's what it is. Now Ichazo doesn't, wasn't a Christian, didn't think about that way. He saw these as patterns that you get caught up in and that you're conditioned by. And he called them ego fixations. So these ego fixations, you identify with ego fixation on point 7. That's your ego fixation. That is messing you up. You've got to work through that. And you uncover the true essence under that false, ego fixation.
Yeah.
So that's how he taught it. That's how he taught the Enneagram. He didn't use the word types. He used ego fixation.
And it was about sins, not about personalities. It's about specific.
Yeah,
the 7 deadly sins plus 2.
Not. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it wasn't a personality analysis.
Okay.
It was more that this is what the kind of behavior and things that you believe in, and the way you are because of these conditionings and these false beliefs.
Wow. Okay.
So you work through that to get to understand your true essence.
And he's doing this in Chile. He's kind of got a center, like a cult type.
He has a
thing.
school there called Eureka. You had to sign when you went there. You had to sign a document saying you would not reveal anything that was taught there.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Very typical secret occult school. I mean, this is typical for schools like that. I mean, they're still around, I mean, not Eureka, but they still exist.
Yeah.
And Ichazo just died, I think he just died last year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he lived to be like 92 or something.
Wow.
He was born in 1931, I think. 1931, 1932. So he lived a long life. He retired to Hawaii. He was in Hawaii when he died. So that's where he was. Because when I started investigating, both he and Claudio Naranjo, the two main people, were alive. And they both just recently died. Naranjo died the year before.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So
Wow,
they
okay.
both lived very long because they were only born a year apart.
Wow. So Ichazo's teaching this in the 60s. 7 deadly sins. You got to uncover this.
Eureka.
Okay.
Yeah. And guess who comes there as a student? Claudio Naranjo.
Okay.
So Claudio Naranjo's a Chilean. He's a psychiatrist, but his specialty is using hallucinogenic drugs and seeing the effects on the mind. And he also used it for spiritual trips, just like they did in the 60s, LSD. Yeah. You guys are too young for that, but
we've heard the stories.
Stories, right? Yeah. So that's what he was into. He's heard about Ichazo. He goes and he meets Ichazo. It's very interesting because there's actually a YouTube. Claudio Naranjo has several videos on YouTube where he's interviewed. And there's a long one where he talks about going and meeting Ichazo. And he talks about how Ichazo said something to him that was false. It was like he was tricking Naranjo. And Naranjo either knew he was tricking him or he found out he was tricking him. And that impressed Naranjo. And he decided that he wanted Ichazo to study under Ichazo because Ichazo was a trickster.
Oh, wow. That's scary.
Now, see, most people would think, well, I don't want a teacher that's, going to deceive me. But see, in the New Age, everything's backwards in the New Age. You can see this as something clever and profound. And I found this to be true in Buddhism, too. Okay. They don't talk about it in that way, that they're tricking you or deceiving you. But there's this idea that kind of not seeing something, putting it out blatantly, the truth blatantly out there, but kind of like hiding it, it's kind of like a game or something. Okay. I see that sometimes in Hinduism and Buddhism. So I was really into Buddhism when I was in the New Age. So I was into Zen Buddhism for 12 years.
Wow.
Oh. So he thought, he was impressed. So he starts studying under Ichazo at Eureka. They go out and do these. Ichazo sends him out into the desert areas there with drugs, and he does these spiritual trips out in the desert. Ichazo does them too.
Okay. Ichazo
claimed 2 spirits he was in contact, Metatron and the Green Ketub.
What?
Now, Metatron is the name of an archangel in the Kabbalah. And I have read that Ichazo supposedly studied the Kabbalah, so I'm guessing that's where he got that name. The Green Ketub is connected to Sufism. Now, he also claims sometimes, see, here again, he's the trickster, so he'll change what he says. He says they're spirits, then he says, no, they're states of mind.
Okay.
So you aren't getting the straight story here.
Yeah.
But he did claim his school was guided by an interior master. So that's a spirit.
That's scary.
Well,
yeah. Wow.
Of course.
Considering what Ichazo taught and his lifestyle and what I know about him, I'm not surprised at all that he did spirit contact. That would just fit in with everything I know about him.
Yeah.
Okay, that would just be normal, So that's important to know because there is a claim that he got the information on the ego fixations or some of the information while he was high on mescaline. Now, that is a source from, I think it's a news source called Catholic World, which was trying to expose the Enneagram because it had gotten to the Catholic Church. And so some people were not happy and were trying to.
Of course.
So now I don't know. I haven't tried to verify that. But anyway, that's one of the stories.
But he himself claimed that he learned this from either these two spirits or these two states of mind. That's what his.
Well, that's some people say he said that.
Okay.
I don't know that I can say he actually said that.
Okay.
It's here again, it's like you're dealing with stories with these people.
Gotcha.
Like with Gergief. You're just dealing with stories. He was a trickster. So you don't know, is he going to say something and maybe it's not true?
Yeah, who knows?
Okay. I mean, but I do think he was in contact with spirits based on what I know about the occult and the New Age, based on everything I know about him, and that he was teaching occultism at a secret school. I did get a private message last year or the year before from a woman who told me she had been raised at Eureka because her mother was a follower of Ichazo.
Oh, man.
And she said what Ichazo taught I consider to be black magic.
Wow.
Okay.
And I tried to talk to her again, and that was it. She just talked to me one time, and that was. So I never got. I wanted to ask her more questions, but that was it.
Right.
So anyway, now we have Ichazo and Naranjo, Claudio Naranjo. His son had died, and so he was grieving, and that's why he was seeking. He was looking for a teacher, and he ended up with Ichazo. Naranjo takes the Enneagram from Ichazo and goes to California to a place called Esalen, a very edgy place that was a breeding ground for the human potential movement, experimental psychology, and the New Age.
It's in Big Sur, isn't it?
It's in,
Big
yes.
Sur, California, yeah.
Big Sur, yeah. And if you look it up now, it still exists. It's very New Agey. They're doing yoga. I think they're I don't think they're quite as wild as they were in the 60s.
Sure. Nobody is, right?
Yeah. Or it was like the late 60s, early 70s. It was, I remember hearing about Esalen. It was just, out there. And as Dr. Huggins says, because I quoted him on this in one of the things I wrote on Facebook, it was a place where he met somebody who thought Esalen was sort of a scholarly think tank. And he was so blown away that she thought this. He was like, no, I don't think so. He said, no, it was more of a place where you'd find people naked and doing drumming.
Okay. I understand that kind of a place, yeah.
That's his phrase, if I can say that.
Yeah.
So anyway, so here we are at Esalen, and Claudio Naranjo is teaching it, but he's teaching it with the types, the 9 types. Now, he says in a video in 2010 that is on YouTube that the way he got the information for the types was from his higher authorities. Higher authorities are his spirit guides.
That's scary.
And he talks about them. He's on a New Age program. The other people there, the man who's interviewing him is a New Ager. Okay. And, he says higher authorities, and Claudio Naranjo says, yes, the higher authorities. I trust them. I have them. Ichazo had them, and I trust his higher authorities. We have higher authorities. And the guy's like, yes. They're talking about spirit guides.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. And he says that's how he got most of the information.
Not through psychology, not through studying types of personalities. Nothing through
He's-
spirit
He
guides.
says that he said he affirmed what he got through his observations, but there's nothing written down. He didn't do a paper, a scholar, he didn't like go to a psychological research institute and say, okay, here is what I have. How does this fit? Can we check this out and see if this works as a personality theory?
Okay.
It was never tested. It was never used by professionals. It was never recognized, and still isn't. It's still not recognized.
Well, and usually those things take it's usually not one person who comes up with these massive
Right,
personalities.
exactly.
It's teams of people,
Yes.
taking a lot of work and research.
Yes.
So, wow. We'll have a link in the show notes to that video of Naranjo saying that he received it from Spirit Guide.
Yeah,
so if
I'll
our
do that.
listeners want to check that out, we'll have it in the show notes.
And just so people know, he says it in another video too, a much longer video where he talks about his time at Esalen. At the very end, I think it's the last 5 or 6 minutes, he says that he got the types from his higher authorities, his contacts. And that's the very end. It's kind of thrown in there because I was watching that video and it was so long and I was almost at the end and I thought, do I really need to listen to the rest? And I did.
Right.
And I'm glad I did because I heard him say it there. So that's what you have. And you don't have any kind of input from research or psychological theory. If people are interested in this, really the only thing, from what I understand, recognized in terms of personality, or one of the things that's recognized by psychology, is what Jordan Peterson calls the Big Five. And actually, I don't think he calls it that. I think psychology calls it that. But he says it's 5 groupings of characteristics, and most people kind of fall into one of them.
Okay.
And if you go on YouTube and do a search, Jordan Peterson Big Five, there's 3 or 4 videos that come up where he talks about it.
Okay.
And there's one where he's talking to his class at the university and explaining it. And then there's another one where he's being interviewed. So there's different videos where he explains what these are and how they came to formulate it.
Okay.
Now, that is based on theories and research. I'm not saying it's necessarily correct or I agree with it or that it's even good,
Sure.
but it's at least based on some kind of data that has been researched, unlike the Enneagram.
Right.
So you basically have this Enneagram being used, and you have Christians pigeonholing themselves and thinking that this is them. Oh, yeah, I'm an 8, and that's why I do this, and that's why... when I argue with my husband, he's a 2, and that's why this happens. And, and they're seeing themselves through this filter, this false filter. And that is very limiting. And I know that as a former professional astrologer, because you do the same thing in astrology. You see yourself as, okay, I'm a Sagittarius and I'm Pisces rising. My moon is in Leo. And, that is why when this happens, I do this. And that's why I cry when this happens. And that's why I don't, I act bossy when this happens or whatever.
Yeah.
You filter everything in your life, the way you react and everything. You start filtering it through that. It's either through astrology or through the Enneagram type. It's the same thing. And I hear from Christians who have seen this invade their church. They say that's what happens. People start talking about their type. And now even some Christian employers will give the Enneagram to people applying for jobs.
Wow. Man,
And
that's crazy.
I've had Christians contact me and say they want me to take this Enneagram test. I'm applying for a job at this ministry, and they want me to take this Enneagram test.
Wow.
Or if the pastors are doing it, all the pastors do it as a pastoral team kind of consult.
Yeah, I've seen that happening a lot. One of the things that I think is weird about it is, like, even what you were saying about astrology. So this really kind of pushes like a deterministic worldview. Like, you do these things because the stars are aligned this way. You don't really have a choice in the matter type idea, which I don't think is biblical.
No, no. For one thing, the way the planets are when you're born has absolutely nothing to do with who you are.
Yeah.
Astrology is based on the belief that the position of the planets at the time and place of your birth represent a kind of a blueprint of your life. Now, it's not as deterministic and fatalistic as it used to be because of psychology. Psychology changed astrology. And so, to a certain extent. So now astrologers will see it in a more psychological fashion, and they'll say, oh, well, you have Venus here next to Neptune, so you need to watch out because you're going to be attracted to men, if you're talking to a woman, maybe men who deceive you, or men who aren't, maybe lie to you, or maybe they aren't clear about, their goals or whatever. So then you give different options, or they might be like this, or, so this is what you need to do to deal with that.
Wow, well, that's so vague. It could fit into like any category.
Well, yeah.
Well, anyone, that could be anyone. Like, you don't have
anybody,
to. Yeah. That's that description that you just gave for that. Like, it's so vague. It's like, of course, it could apply to anybody.
Well, yeah, you could be attracted to somebody who's not upfront with you. I mean, a lot of people are not upfront with other people.
I mean, wow, what do you know? It's astrology. That's why it happened.
Well, when it
or you have the planet Uranus there, which is instability, or it could be innovative. You could be attracted to very innovative people who are like avant-garde, or it could be an unstable person. So see, there's room there. It's like it could be either one. You see, and so there are options. What I'm trying to say is that there's these options.
Yeah, and so it's just not very defined at all. It can be a lot of different options to how it works.
Well, yeah, a
so
lot of different options. And astrology, which is the chart, is extremely complicated because you have all the planets, the sun and the moon. You have 12 houses, and you have the 12 zodiac signs, and they're all interacting in different ways. So you have I think it's mathematically, the options are so unbelievable how many you can have that you can't even count that high.
Wow.
Somebody actually figured it out, an astrologer, and it was using numbers with squared.
Wow.
Yeah,
sure.
Well, I can see
squared times something squared.
Wow. Well, when it comes to the Enneagram, like, because again, I don't think it necessarily pushes like a determinism, but I do hear people. I have heard people use it as an excuse of like, well, what do you expect? I'm a 9. Oh, well, that's what I do.
Well,
I'm a 2.
I actually think it is at least partially deterministic. I agree with you because I think the Enneagram is more I'm not trying to make astrology sound good. I think it's more limited than astrology because it doesn't have quite as many options in it. Even though people think it's the wings, it's nothing compared to the complexity of astrology. It's still somewhat complex, but it's still it is kind of deterministic because just like you said, and people have told me, I hear people in my church talk about, well, she doesn't want to help, clean up after the supper because she's a 7 or something, or she wants to do something else. Let her do something else because she's a 7, and let her do something else because she's a 6.
Wow.
So you've got people are starting to determine, well, maybe you shouldn't do that. Maybe that's not your role because you're a 6 or whatever. So I have been told that by people who see this actually lived out in their church.
Man, that's crazy.
And actually, I was on a program about the Enneagram with a woman who was she was a pastor's wife at the time, who got into the Enneagram and introduced it to other women in the church. And she said, that's what we were talking about all the time. I'm a 6, my husband's a 4, and my daughter's an 8. And so, we have to deal with blah, blah, blah. And she said it was unreal. We were just so into the grooves of these types because that's going to be the default. That is where we go.
So how does
because
we
are.
Yeah, with that. So like let's talk about like the dangers of this in the church.
Yeah.
Like, what is it doing, and what do we need to be? I mean, again, I think we just shouldn't use it. I don't think it's a legitimate tool at all. But I know some people will say, well, listen, there's the genetic fallacy, which is this idea that, accepting or rejecting a belief or a tool or a claim merely based on where it originated is a fallacy. And I understand that because an atheist can say something that's true, right? A Christian can say something that's false. But if they apply that to the Enneagram, like, how would you combat that? Just because it's occultic in origin doesn't mean it's not legitimate. What would we say to that?
Yeah, one of my answers to that is, if this is supposed to be a tool that gives you information on who you are, then the origin does matter.
Mm.
Because if you want some kind of tool that you think is a personality tool, although that's not what the Enneagram is,
Mm-hmm.
it should be based on personality theories or research.
Yes.
It should come from the field of psychology.
Yep.
It shouldn't come from spirit contact and some guy who was, taking drugs and having spiritual trips on drugs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like in this case the origin matters. So in some cases the origin doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
The origin, my car maybe was designed by an atheist. It's very possible. Or maybe the guy who put the seats in the car is an atheist.
Sure.
That doesn't matter because the car still works.
Yes.
And, whether he was an atheist or a Hindu has nothing to do with my car. But when it comes to a personality or who you are and a tool that you're looking at yourself, where that originates matters.
Yeah.
And so in some cases, the origin matters. So in other words, the genetic fallacy sometimes is true. It is a fallacy, but it is not always a fallacy because in some cases the origins matter.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. And then, like another thing I hear too, oftentimes is they say like kind of what you brought up. A common thing I've heard is they say, "Oh, we can still use the Enneagram because it's helpful." It actually, like it has these issues.
Yeah, it works for us.
It works for us. It's helpful. We can, it has a corrupt origin, but we can redeem it for something in the church. What would you say to people like that say it's helpful, it's redeemable? Yes, it has bad origins, but we can use it to grow closer to the Lord. How would you combat that?
Yes, and there's actually two arguments there to respond to. One is that it's helpful, or it works for us, or it helped my marriage, or whatever. The other is we can redeem it. So they can be connected, but they're actually two issues.
Oh, of course.
So as far as redeeming it goes, and that I've heard that too. In fact, I ended up writing an article on my website because I heard it so much. It's called "Can God Redeem Anything?" If we look at the Bible, what does God redeem? He redeems people. He redeems people, and he's going to redeem creation.
Yes.
Because he made it, creation. Came from God. God made it. He's going to redeem that. I don't see God saying he's going to take, the practice of spiritism and the practice of witchcraft, and he's going to redeem those.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
He doesn't say, well, one day, when you're with me in eternal life, it's okay. You can do, we'll have a godly witchcraft. We'll have godly spirit contact. He doesn't redeem a cult. He doesn't redeem things he condemns.
Yes. Yep.
He condemns certain things and says that they are evil and have nothing to do with them. And these things are connected to Satan. For example, the practices of divination and spirit contact and witchcraft and everything were connected with the worship of false gods. That's in Deuteronomy 18 and other passages. And so it's connected with false gods, and we know false gods are connected to Satan, and there are many passages that connect false gods to demons. And what's going to happen at the end of time, Satan and his angels will be thrown into the lake of fire. There will be no more of that kind of thing. It will be destroyed because they will be banished. So God doesn't redeem occult practices. And, if you think he's redeeming people, now our argument that's kind of a sideline to that is people will say, well, but, God used Cyrus and God used the Pharaoh. God used Pharaoh in Egypt. Yes, God used the Magi.
Yeah.
Okay. Who did astrology. Yes, God used these people for his purposes, but that nowhere do you see in those passages that because God used them, that he endorsed them.
No.
Yes.
Endorsed their views. God used Balaam too, who was a false prophet. And Balaam is condemned in 3 different places in the New Testament. He is condemned. But yet God used him. And it was to show and when God used Balaam and God used Cyrus and God used Pharaoh, it was to show his power over them. It was to show God has power over these people who are trying to thwart his purposes or trying to hurt his people, or whatever the case may be, because the king had hired Balaam to curse Israel. Well, God wasn't going to let that happen.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
God showed them that he wasn't going to let it happen by using the very guy who was supposed to curse Israel.
Yep.
It's really actually
Yeah.
a fabulous story. I love the story of Balaam. It's in Numbers if you guys want to read it.
Oh yeah, it's so great. I love that story.
I mean, not you guys, but I mean anybody
yeah, our
listening.
audience. Yep.
Maybe hasn't read it. Maybe they're a new Christian or whatever. It's a great story.
It is.
I mean, it's a true story. So
what do you think? Let me ask you a question about this. So, in my mind, because these different types, if somebody tells me I'm a 2 or somebody tells me I'm a 7, and I believe either one of those, I can find things similar about myself that are in all of the different types because it's vague enough to do that.
yeah,
So at best, I seem to believe that the Enneagram, at best, the best thing it can be is a gigantic waste of time, but
Yes.
it might be worse than that. So,
Yes.
like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, what
Yes.
could be going on here? What could be the demonic play of getting this into the church?
yeah, I should talk about the dangers. Let me quickly answer the other thing, which is what do you say to someone who says it's helped?
Yes.
Oh, right.
That's-
Sorry about that.
This is what I say. I say you think it has been helping you, and this is because of these psychological factors like the Barnum effect. Okay, this is where you identify with certain descriptions, and there's a process that you latch onto things that you think are you, and so you think, okay, so I'm a 6 or whatever. And same thing, it works in astrology the same way. And these factors cause you to make it seem true to you. And then you also have something called subjective validation, where you try to look at the connections that fit with you. And you also ignore the ones that don't. So there's a process going on where you believe it. And then when you think it helps you, there's a couple of things that are happening there. It may be that because you're dealing with an issue and you think, okay, this is my issue, and you already know it's your issue, the Enneagram just validates its confirmation bias.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, I always do that. So 3, that's me because I always do that. All right, I need to deal with this issue. And then maybe you try to deal with the issue, and maybe that helps you because you've decided you're going to do something about this negative thing. And then you say, the Enneagram helped me. But the Enneagram didn't really help you. It's because you decided to deal with an issue you had.
Okay.
You could have dealt with that another way. You didn't need the Enneagram for it.
Yeah.
So, and the other thing I say is that if we're going as Christians to base truth on experience, which is what that argument is,
That's true.
to me, that's an experience, then we're going to have to accept the argument from all the astrology believers who say astrology helps them.
Yeah.
And all my clients said doing their chart helped. Some of them said it helped them more than therapy.
Wow.
Okay. So I had compliments. I didn't have to find clients. I had clients all the time because it was all word of mouth, because I was quote unquote so good at what I did. Well, and there are a lot of reasons for that, and I'm not trying to say I'm not trying to I'm not trying to compliment myself.
Yeah. Sure.
Because
Right.
Yeah.
I'm good are not really good reasons. So it wasn't good that I was good. So you have all these people who think astrology is true because of their experience with it, because it helped them, because they think it was them. And if we're going to take that for the Enneagram as truth, then you can't tell these people that astrology isn't valid.
Yeah.
You're going to have to give.
It's the same foundation. That's true.
Yeah, it's the same standard.
Yep.
You can't say, well, it helped me, so the Enneagram's true, but astrology helped you. No, astrology isn't true. No, you got to accept that. But that is the New Age outlook. And that is one of the dangers of the Enneagram. It's leading people to think like New Agers.
Well, and that's why it's so popular in the progressive church, right? Because
Yeah.
they have a relativistic mindset already,
Yes,
and we
yes.
create our own truth. And so if it
Yes.
works, hey, who cares? And so, but it's seeping into non-progressive churches, and that's where it's getting
Exactly.
dangerous.
That's the danger, and you're right. That's why I can understand why it got so popular in the progressive church first. So that's one of the dangers. And of course, other dangers are that you pigeonhole yourself instead of seeing yourself the way God is telling you who you are. And what is our purpose? And as far as being sanctified, God's word tells us that we're being conformed to the image of Christ.
Yes.
That is what God is shaping us. And there's lots of things about how we're being shaped and pruned and all of that. And what for, the whole purpose is to be more Christ-like, to be conformed to the image of Christ. So that is the standard. So Christ is our model.
Yes.
Christ is our standard, not healthy 6, or I need to be a better 7,
Yeah.
or I need to be a good 5. No, that's not our model. Our model is Jesus Christ.
Yep, that's right.
So, and unfortunately, you have people teaching the Enneagram who say things like, Christ is the sum of all of 9 types.
Wow.
Christ is at the center of the Enneagram and is the sum of all 9 types. I heard an Enneagram teacher say that. So they're trying to put Jesus into the Enneagram here, which is horrible in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
That's awful.
to make it seem okay. But no, you don't look at Jesus through these 9 types.
No.
We look at Jesus through how he's revealed in God's word.
Well, and that's what Scripture says. Hebrews, right, 4 talks about how, in the former days, God revealed himself through prophets and in many different ways, but now he's revealed himself in his Son, not in the Enneagram. And so Jesus is the standard, right? That's
exactly.
It literally says, laying aside all hindrances, we keep our focus on him, the author and perfecter of our faith. And so this idea that I need a different tool, it's like, no, Jesus is the tool. And he's better than a tool because he's a person.
Well, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we can abide in him, and he can abide in us. And it just it's such a better standard than a diagram.
Yeah, and this whole idea in itself is saying that there's a better way to understand who you are and your friends than what you can get from God and through Scripture. That's actually like, if you really break it down, that's what it's saying.
You're right, Tyler, because it's putting aside the sufficiency of Scripture for Christian growth. For Christian growth and living the Christian life, God tells us his word is sufficient, and it equips us for everything we need.
Yeah.
And so that is how we grow. That is how we learn. And we learn more about God and Jesus through studying Scripture. That strengthens our relationship with the Lord. That strengthens, our ability to submit to the Holy Spirit and to grow in Christ. Yeah. It's, all the God's word is his word. It's not just another book. It's living and active, as he says in Hebrews 4. It's living and active. And so when we're in tune with God's word by reading and studying it, we're shaped through that and through the Holy Spirit. And if we go towards something else like the Enneagram, it takes us away from that. And like you said, it's saying Scripture isn't sufficient. We need something else. So we'll take Scripture and the Enneagram, you see, and then they try to meld them, but they don't mix. It's like oil and water. They don't mix, and people are trying to mix them. And what does that end up doing? It ends up elevating the Enneagram and demeaning God's word. That's what happens. When you try to mix Scripture with something unscriptural, you're going to demean Scripture and elevate whatever it is you're trying to mix it with. So unfortunately, that I see that. I see that happening. That's another danger. And another danger I see is that it's introducing a lot of people to Richard Rohr. I've had many people tell me that because they got into the Enneagram, it was maybe introduced to them by a friend or in their church or something. And in their reading, they would come across Richard Rohr's name. And then they would say, oh, well, I'm going to look this guy up. And he's written a lot of books. And I've had people tell me they started reading Richard Rohr and getting influenced by his ideas. This is very dangerous, since Rohr is completely heretical. I didn't say this earlier. Richard Rohr believes there's a distinction between Jesus and what he calls the universal Christ. So Jesus and the Christ are not the same. Wow. So you have a huge heresy right there.
Yeah.
And, when Jesus was, during the 33 years Jesus was on earth, he was the universal Christ. The universal Christ was with him or in him. But at the resurrection, the universal Christ split and became this power that is pulling creation towards perfection. And Jesus, because Rohr has said things like, Christ said things Jesus would never say.
Okay.
And Jesus is holding the kite, and the kite is Christ. and Jesus is holding the kite. So the kite, Jesus is down here, the kite's way up here, so that everybody can see the kite. They don't need to see Jesus.
Oh, I see.
And he also says Matthew, Mark, and Luke wrote about Jesus, but John and Paul wrote about Christ.
Wow. Why should we take his opinions on this? That's my question, is who are you? Like, you didn't rise from the dead, validating that your message is pretty legitimate. Why should I trust your interpretation of this, you know?
He has an incredible influence. There's something about Rohr and maybe the state of the church that's made itself open to somebody like Rohr. Rohr has been influencing the church more and more, and this Enneagram gave him another open door.
Yeah.
I think he was already an influence in certain ways with progressive circles, because there's definitely a progressive movement in the evangelical church, and there are churches that are going progressive that were once very more solid.
Yeah.
And so Rohr, this gives Rohr more space, and the Enneagram just elevates him because he's seen as kind of the master of it. And here, I've got to say this, the first two books that came out that you would say were books for evangelicals on the Enneagram were The Road Back to You by Ian Cron and Suzanne Stabile, right? And then the year after came The Sacred Enneagram by Chris Horitz. Suzanne Stabile was mentored by Richard Rohr for years, and Chris Horitz was mentored by Richard Rohr for years. Chris Horitz and his wife have a very close relationship with Richard Rohr. They've been on the board of each other's organizations.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I personally think Ian Cron and Suzanne Stabile and Horitz and his wife are perennialists. And I base this on things I've read by them and on podcasts I've heard from Chris Horitz.
Yeah, and that's not Christianity at all.
No, it's not. It's not Christianity.
No.
You cannot be a perennialist and be a Christian, because if you're a perennialist, you first of all, you don't think man is separate, needs reconciliation with God.
Yeah.
Therefore, you don't believe that Jesus had to die for sins.
Yeah.
So it's impossible to be a Christian and be a perennialist.
Which fits in with the progressive church, but it does not
Yes.
fit in with classical or historic Christianity.
Exactly.
I mean, and really, like, even with progressive Christianity, the term, it should really just be called universalism, because that's what it is.
Yeah,
it's like a transition between, I grew up evangelical, but I want to believe in these secular ideologies. It's like a stepping stone just to going the full way.
That's true. They mix in a little New Age. They mix in maybe a little Buddhism. They mix, it is.
But they're culturally Christian, and that's why they call it that. But it's a misnomer
they
for
still
sure.
talk about Jesus. They still talk about Jesus, and they'll refer to the Bible, but it's just it's a different kind of Christianity. It's not. It's a counter Christianity.
Yep. Well, what would you say, like, real quick, because we're running out of time, but what would you say, to somebody who has gotten wrapped up in this and is hearing all this for the first time and they're being alarmed? What are the steps? What do they do from where they're at?
You mean if they're involved in it?
Yeah.
Or
let's say a Christian who's been taking it for truth and they've been running with it for a year or two and thinking it's really helpful.
Yeah. How do they respond to that?
If they're willing to listen to me.
Yes. Yeah, that's the key.
What I usually get is somebody wanting to argue with me.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, if they want to listen to me, I tell them, I tell them what it really is if they don't know, if they don't have the facts on it, and that it's not valid psychologically. It's totally invalid. It's bringing in these false ideas into the church. It's bringing them a false idea of who they are. And that they need to go back to Scripture.
Yeah.
And that's where they will learn how to live the Christian life. That's where they learn about God, and that's where they learn, what to do as a Christian. That's the whole purpose of the New Testament.
Yep.
Then the letters, the epistles, are all, mostly to churches, telling them this is what we do. This is what God wants you to do.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's very Christ-focused and Christ-centered, and that's what they need to get back to. So, awesome. Most people who have talked to me and have learned what the Enneagram is have said, when I realized what it really was, or maybe I realized it, but I still thought I could do it, and then I was convicted that it was wrong. or I saw that I was going in a bad direction with it, I got rid of my books, and now I'm telling my friends don't do it.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah.
Although some of them will say I'm having a hard time. My friends are mad at me. They don't want to talk to me anymore. Yeah, really. It's sad. It's actually ended friendships.
So it's divisive as well.
It's divisive. That's another way we can see it's not from the Lord, because it is. And I've known many, 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 many people who have left their church because of this.
Wow.
They have gone to the leaders of the church and tried to reason with them and shown them the information on the Enneagram. And they've been told, no, I still see it as a useful tool. We still see it as useful. We're going to use it.
Yeah.
And then they just can't stay there anymore.
Sure, of course.
Well, yeah.
But that's hard. That's hard if that's been your church, especially if you've been there a while and you have friends there and, children are there maybe. That's really hard.
It is. It's such a tough issue, but we always want to be standing for truth, and we got to go back to God's word on truth. We've got to understand what Christianity is. We have to be able to assess these things always through the lens of Scripture. And we are so thankful, Marcia, for you being here today to help us do that very thing.
Thank you so much.
Well,
with
I'm
a really
thankful that
confusing
you want to
subject.
expose this. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm thankful to you guys wanting to put the word out there and, let people know who may not know all of this.
Yeah, we need to. We got to be careful because, the Scripture's clear that there's wolves who try to come in and try to disrupt and try to cause dissension and confusion. And as Christians, we should be having each other's backs and care enough maybe sometimes to hurt feelings of people we know, not on purpose, but because truth can be offensive sometimes. And this, I think, is one of those things. So we're very thankful for you coming on the show. And, hey, if people want to check out your ministry or read some of your material, where can they contact you?
Okay, I have a website, ChristianAnswersForTheNewAge.org. I have many articles there. I have several articles on the Enneagram there. Also, I have a Facebook ministry page called Christian Answers for the New Age, and I do posts there on New Age and occult topics, mostly.
Awesome.
So that's where I put most of my material. And then, of course, there's the book, Richard Rohr and the Enneagram Secret, by myself and by Don and Joy Veinot, Veinot. They run a ministry called Midwest Christian Outreach that they've been doing for quite a while, over 20 years, over 25 years.
Wow.
So that I have an early book, I'll just briefly mention it, that came out in 2006 called Spellbound, the Paranormal Seduction of Today's Kids. It's about the occult. And it's on Amazon. Unfortunately, sometimes from sellers, it's like, $90 or something.
Oh,
I don't know how they determine these prices. And then it'll go down to like 10.
Wow.
But you can get it on Kindle. So, if you can't, don't want to pay $90 for it.
Yeah, sure. Well, we'll put links to both of those books in the show notes. So if anybody wants to go grab those off Amazon, you can definitely do that. But Marcia, thank you so much again for being with us today. This has just been awesome. Hey, and listeners, we're appreciative of you being here. Be back next week when we come back with another episode of Christ, Culture, and Coffee. We'll see you then.